hosted by Rod Meldrum and Jonathan Neville, and presented by Gospel Doctrine Answers. In today's podcast, we will study Doctrine and Covenants 20 through 22, the rise of the Church of Christ.
Welcome, everybody.
Howdy.
We are excited to have you join us for our podcast this week. This is lesson number 10. This is Doctrine and Covenants sections 20 through 22. And I've got with me, you probably recognize him under the cowboy hat there. Chinese cowboy hat, by the way.
Yeah.
This is Jonathan Neville. And we're going to be discussing some awesome things today. And Jonathan, you give us kind of a little bit of overview as to what we're going to be going in these sections here.
Yeah, okay. So, well, first off, Rod alluded to my hat. So I just explained. I did buy this in China, actually, about a year ago, a little over a year ago, because we were in southern China, and there's a lot of cowboys there. People don't realize. But up in the mountains.
Chinese cowboys.
Chinese cowboys, and they wear cowboy hats and ride horses and stuff. So I like their hats so much. Me and some of my colleagues got these hats, and you'll see why I'm wearing it here today in a minute. But
there's a purpose.
And it's comfortable.
There's a purpose for all things, right?
Right.
Okay,
yeah.
So there we go.
Better than a golf hat. Right?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, so this lesson covers D&C 20 through 22, and we thought we'd just kind of do the outline of section 20 briefly to orient us. And that is, the first 16 verses talk about how the Book of Mormon proves the divinity of the latter-day work, and that's what we're going to focus on to begin with. Mm-hmm. And then the next verses talk about the doctrine of creation, the fall, atonement, and baptism that Rod wants to talk about a little bit. Mm-hmm. And then the laws governing repentance, justification, sanctification, and so on, the duties of elders, priests, teachers. We're not going to cover too much of the administrative information in D&C 20. The sacramental prayers, of course, are here at the end of section 20. One interesting note on the sacramental prayers is that until the Book of Mormon was published, this revelation was given about the time of the organization of the church, after the Book of Mormon had actually been published in March, as I recall. But Oliver Cowdery had written out the sacramental prayers when he did the 3-page explanation of the church organization back in June of 1829. And his organization of the church was the only source for those sacramental prayers for several months until the Book of Mormon was actually published. So that's what they would use when they would do the sacrament. But anyway, so that's our outline for today.
All right.
And I guess the first thing to talk about, because this section 20 talks about the rise of the Church of Christ. So we thought we'd talk just for a minute about the relationship between Christ, the church, and the people. Some people feel like, well, you can just have a direct relationship with Christ, you don't need a church. There's some people who think that the church is everything. When I say church, I'm not talking about the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. I'm talking about church in general, an organization. Yeah. Some people feel like the church is all you really need and you don't have a direct relationship with Christ. So you have both of these schools of thought in the world, but the restored gospel teaches us the importance of both. You can have a direct relationship with Christ, and President Nelson emphasizes that over and over, that we need to seek our own personal revelation. Mm-hmm. And the Doctrine and Covenants talks about that as well. But we also need a church. And why do we need a church? And we're going to talk about why we need a church. But partly it's because in order to accomplish the work of the Lord, especially to establish Zion, we have to have a unified group. We have to have a structure, an organization that we can contribute to and participate in. Otherwise, we're all just scattered doing our own thing. And so this section of the Doctrine and Covenants outlines all this pretty well.
Yeah, we need to have each other. We need to be able to. Each one of us have different expertise in different areas, and then we share that with our fellow members.
Well, just as an example, the church does a lot of humanitarian work, and we all would like to do humanitarian work, but if we're doing it on our own, it's pretty scattered and not coordinated and so on. The whole idea of having an organization or a structure is that we can each contribute the best of our talents and optimize everything. It's kind of like what Adam Smith said about an economy, where you have specialization and exchange. You specialize in something that you do better than anybody else, or at least you do really well, and then you're more productive, and you can share and exchange with others who are also specialized. And the church is the same way, because we have all different interests in the church. We have people who have different talents, different abilities, different education, experience, and so on. And we can each specialize and become really good at that, and then exchange it with others and edify everyone.
Yeah, exactly. Like specialization of labor in the labor force.
yeah. That's
not everybody needs to know how to make clothing, for example.
Right.
Okay, so.
And the other reason for the church is the ordinances in the temples. We're not going to have an individual temple. When I lived in Africa, the guy across the street from us was a Hindu. We were living in Mauritius, which is majority Hindu country. Mm-hmm. But the guy across the street from us had a little devotional area, a little Hindu temple. And every day he would
go out there and
make music and do his thing. And a lot of the rich people in Mauritius had these little shrines in their yards. But it's not practical for us all to build a temple in our backyard, right? And and it involves workers. So it involves a lot of organization to administer the ordinances of the gospel. And that's another reason why we have the church.
Yeah.
Okay. So we want to talk about verses 8 through 12. We'll start with that, and then you're going to pick up the next section, right? Or was there something before that?
I was just going to talk about verse 12 primarily, but
okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
So this we thought was a very interesting verse. It's often overlooked in these discussions that we have about the Book of Mormon, the translation, and so on, Moroni. Mm-hmm. And this issue of Moroni has come up recently in some online forums and discussions, articles, and so on. So I thought it'd be good to review this one.
Yes, absolutely.
And you'll see why I'm wearing the hat here in a second. Okay, so verse 6 says, after repenting and humbling himself sincerely through faith. Now that passage right there is so important. Let's just talk about that for a second, because Joseph admitted that he made mistakes, and the previous verses address that. But after he repented and humbled himself sincerely through faith, he had faith to repent, had faith to humble himself, and then, of course, he asked God. God ministered unto him by a holy angel, whose countenance was as lightning, and whose garments were pure and white above all other whiteness. Now, this is not the exact quotation that Joseph Smith had, but this is another description of Moroni. And gave unto him commandments which inspired him. Now, this is a famous painting in the church. You see the problem with the painting. You know the problem with the painting?
Well, you mean the shadow?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Moroni was the source of light. He wasn't. It wasn't some.
It looks like the light was coming from Joseph Smith against him,
exactly,
reflecting on the back ceiling.
Right.
Yeah. Anyway.
So as a result of that, there's additional paintings have been come up with, and these are kind of interesting because we have the one that we just looked at, and then there's this one in the middle that I found that I hadn't seen this one before, but it's a really old painting. I think it was from 1912. It was first published. Uh-huh. But it also shows a glow around Moroni, right?
Okay.
And then the last painting is another one showing Moroni as the source of light with this bright clothing and so on. Mm-hmm. But, there's kind of this idea.
That's consistent with the descriptions.
Yeah. Oliver Cowdery, Joseph Smith both gave descriptions of Moroni that fit this. But lately and the Saints book kind of even talks about this, which is amazing to me, but it's in the Saints book, that Moroni was actually this old man wearing a hat, wearing a suit. And this is the painting that shows supposedly Moroni showing the place to Mary Whitmer. But this is a different kind of Moroni than Joseph or Oliver described, right? So I thought we better go back and fix the paintings.
Okay. Yeah.
And so instead of Moroni, it's got to be an old man in a hat with a suit. And the other one is wrong too, because we got to put another old man kind of in a suit.
Didn't even have a hat though.
This one, he didn't have a hat. It's probably on the floor or something.
Forgot his hat.
But the point of this is to show you what I consider, when you look at things in church history and the scriptures, you have to use your common sense. And the idea that Moroni was at one time a glorious being with a white, clothes and Oliver Cowdery said slightly taller than our normal people today, and just a glorious being.
You can see kind of into his personage because through his robe, a little bit there.
Right.
Yeah,
their seamless robe and all that. Now maybe he could have worn different clothes.
Right.
But
a cowboy hat too.
He could have worn a cowboy hat. But the idea that he would transform into a body that was short, 5'8", that was heavy set, that was old, 70 years roughly, instead of
which is the description here.
Which is the description here.
Right.
That means that kind of lends into this idea that we can shape shift. Yeah, shape change. That our resurrected body is not always the same. We can make it look like whatever we want. And that, to me, is a doctrinal issue, really. I mean, come on. Alma was pretty clear that we're restored exactly.
Yeah.
So the genesis of this story about it being Moroni who showed the plates, the original account was...
Talking to Whitmer. Right?
Well, David Whitmer said they met this guy on the road.
Right.
And he was taking the plates from Harmony, the abridged plates, back to Cumorah. Mm-hmm. And then he said the same person showed the plates, presumably, in my opinion, it had to be the plates of Nephi, because that's what Joseph translated in Fayette. But the same person showed the plates to Mary Whitmer. Mm-hmm. And she said that he identified himself as Brother Nephi. But her grandson, when he wrote about this, said, well, she had to be wrong because it was Moroni who had the keys of the Book of Mormon, so it had to be Moroni, not Nephi.
Oh, so she said it was Nephi, but then her grandson said
it was Moroni.
Else. Okay.
And then David Whitmer said, when he gave an account to Joseph F. Smith and to Edward Stevenson, and David Whitmer said he turned to Joseph and asked about it, and Joseph said he was one of the Nephites who had the plates. Now, the interesting thing about all this is that David Whitmer was convinced, because of what Joseph said, that it was a Nephi. Now, remember, David Whitmer never heard of Cumorah. This was the first time he'd ever heard the word Cumorah, was when they met this messenger taking the plates to Cumorah. But shortly after this, David Whitmer met Moroni as one of the three witnesses. And he in one of his accounts, he said, Moroni addressed me directly as David. So he had a conversation with him. And he knew exactly what Moroni looked like. But the dude, I'd be a little informal, the dude, the Nephite who showed the place to Mary was not Moroni. And David knew because he'd met both of them personally. I mean, there's nothing. Now, what happened is, because of the grandson, there's a history of the church, kind of I don't remember who did it, but it was a composition of church history over time. Mm-hmm. And in there it said Moroni, because of the grandson's account. And so that became kind of the lore in the church. And there's even, people cite what they say is Joseph F. Smith said it was Moroni, which doesn't make sense because Joseph F. Smith was the one who first met, or who interviewed David Whitmer about all this. But there's a typewritten manuscript of minutes of a meeting that are unattributed, but it says in there it was Moroni. And someone said, well, that had to be Joseph F. Smith that taught that. But,
we don't know.
It's not, certainly it's not clear there, but it is clear when you look at David Whitmer, and that this was one of the three Nephites who identified himself to Mary as Nephi, Brother Nephi. And if you read in 3rd Nephi, he doesn't tell us the names of the three Nephites, but they were among the 12, and one of the 12 was Nephi, of course.
Yeah.
And so we infer. The other thing that's interesting, kind of cool, I think, is that if you remember the disciples who remained behind were going
chose to remain.
Well, there are three that stayed behind, and the other 9 did not.
Right.
And at what age would they leave the earth? Do you remember?
The age of a tree or something like that?
Age 70.
Okay.
So I kind of think, well, it makes sense that the three Nephites, when they reached age 70, would have been transformed to be, and that's about the age of this guy.
So those who remain behind, they just keep getting older and older.
Well, no, they would always stay the same, but they would stay about age 70.
Yeah.
So, and there's tons of lore about the three Nephites. We don't have to get into those.
Right.
But in this case, it seems to me obvious that Joseph said he was one of the Nephites. He identified himself as Nephi. David Whitmer met this guy face to face and talked to him. He met Moroni face to face and talked to him, and he said they were two different people. Mm-hmm. So, I think it's too bad this story has been perpetuated, and hopefully, once people take a look at it.
Met with Moroni.
With Moroni, that it was Moroni, because then you open up all kinds of questions about the resurrection. Is it really a perfect resurrection? Can you change your appearance? Yeah, all that. So let's just, my appeal is that we change the Saints book to say it was one of the three Nephites, because that's what Joseph and Mary Whitmer said it was, and then we won't have these crazy issues kicking around. Mm-hmm. So it's an awesome painting. I love the painting, but it's just a painting of the Nephites.
I'm just going to show you that this is the set of church history books that I grew up with my family, and in here they have some paintings about this kind of thing. Here, let me see if I can show you real quick. It's right here. This is the painting inside this old history book, basically, of here's Joseph and Oliver and so forth, and then you have David Whitmer coming down to see them, and then they meet this old guy, but he kind of looks like a little bit of an old guy here, and he has a knapsack on his back and so forth there. It also shows, this is interesting, the translation of the Book of Mormon, and if you take a look, Joseph Smith is using the plates. There's no hat in the picture. Yeah. There's no stone. He's got some straps on it. Maybe there's holding up a breastplate over here, and you have Oliver Cowdery over here writing things down. So how it was depicted back.
Well, that was based on the actual documents.
Oh yeah, okay.
Yeah, but now we have the
new documents,
academic theories and so on.
Okay. Yeah.
So anyway, continuing on with this.
Yes.
So the next verse 8. The Lord's in this section 20 says, "And gave him power from on high by the means which were before prepared to translate the Book of Mormon." Now, what were the means that were before prepared? It was the Urim and Thummim. It was explained in the Book of Mormon and in Joseph Smith's own history that was prepared. That's what Moroni told him it was. And he said to translate the Book of Mormon. Now, this was the cover of the Ensign. I think this was in 2002 or 4, something like that. And I've heard people complain that this is inaccurate. And I think, well, how's it inaccurate? Joseph said when he got the plates, he studied the characters, he copied them, and he translated them with the Urim and Thummim. So he was learning the language that was on the plates. And how could you do that if you weren't looking on the plates? And there's other examples. Now, in this case, it doesn't show him using the Urim and Thummim. So this could have been more where he was studying the characters and copying them. Yeah. You wouldn't need the Urim and Thummim to copy them, but to translate them, you would need the Urim and Thummim. That was the whole point. And we don't have time today to talk about how that worked, but it went on to say here in section 20, it contains the record of a fallen people, the fullness of the gospel of Jesus Christ to the Gentiles. That's what Moroni told him at the very beginning, which was given by inspiration and confirmed to others by the ministering of angels. That's the three witnesses, primarily, and is declared into the world by them. Okay, now, just as a sidelight, let's talk about the plates, because we have them here. We have them in studio, the plates right here in the box. We always depict them as written the way we read books today. You know, we read a book like this, and you can't really see it in the light there, but it goes from top to bottom, either right to left or left to right, depending if you're reading what language. But it turns out we have this characters document that is written what we would call sideways. And I thought the other day, and I've heard this before too, that maybe that's how they appeared on the plates, that the plates were what we would consider sideways. And it's just kind of a new idea. I'm not saying that's what it is, but this could have been a character's, the copy of the characters. And by the way, this is, as I recall, it's the handwriting of John Whitmer, we think. So it's not necessary. It's a copy of a copy, most likely. This may not be, it probably isn't the one that Martin Harris actually took to New York, but we assume it's a fairly good copy.
Anthem.
So one of the things that's kind of cool, this idea, is that if you look at this, there's 4 lines of large print and 3 lines of small print. And if this is the title page, which some people think is, and by going through the characters you can kind of interpret it that way, The top lines could represent Mormon's part of the title page, his handwriting essentially, and the bottom lines could represent Moroni's handwriting, the part he added about the Book of Ether and so on. So that's just another idea that's out there. I've heard lots of different alternative translations of the characters document. But this one kind of appeals to me intrinsically because you would think if they were copying the characters, they would copy them the way they were on the plates. And if that's the case, then they were written what we would call sideways instead of like we're used to today. This is one example of a real insightful translation of the characters that we don't have time to go through, but I just wanted to show you that. Then section 20 goes on to say in verse 11 and 12, proving to the world, in other words, the Book of Mormon was proving to the world that the Holy Scriptures are true. What are the Holy Scriptures? It's the Bible, right? Mm-hmm. So the Book of Mormon proves that the Bible is true. Therefore, every Christian should embrace the Book of Mormon for that reason alone, just because it proves the Bible is true.
Verifying it.
And that God does inspire men and call them to his holy work in this age and generation as well as in generations of old. So that shows that he is the same yesterday, today, and forever. So it's a phenomenal introduction to the organization of the church because, of course, the Book of Mormon is the keystone of our religion. But it also shows how the role the Book of Mormon plays, that it's not only for us as believers in the Book of Mormon, Latter-day Saints, but it's for everybody, and it proves the Bible is true. So anyway, that's what I wanted to cover there.
Yeah, before we leave on verse 12, though, I think it's interesting that showing that he's the same God yesterday, today, and forever. And if you look back at the definition of truth, that truth is a knowledge of things as they are, as they were, and as they are to come. Mm-hmm. In order for something to be considered a truth, it has to have this time element. It has to be true throughout time.
Right.
And I think that's kind of fascinating here. And it talks about that God is this way, but also men can be to some extent this way too. Basically, we have prophets, seers, and revelators. Mm-hmm. And a prophet, seer, and revelator has a little bit of a different connotation between each one of those things. And if you take a look at it, a prophet is a prophet basically who is there to instruct us for our day. So that's the present. Mm-hmm. And then you have a seer is a person who can look back into the past basically and see and interpret and understand things of the past, truths of the past. Okay. And a revelator, somebody who can tell us what's going to happen in the future. Okay. And so a prophet, seer, and revelator is actually a fulfillment, if you will, of that time that time continuum basically of truth. Mm-hmm. So when you have a prophet, seer, and revelator, that means that basically they're talking truth throughout time. Yeah, interesting. And so that's just another interesting little tidbit there to throw in there.
Forever, kind of like yesterday, today, and the future.
Yeah, yes, okay. It's yesterday, today, and in the future. So, okay. And then go ahead. You want to? Anything else there? Okay. Yeah. So then I was going to go into a little bit more about in verse 17 here in section 20. Again, the understanding is that you've already read the things in the manual here, right? And so we're just going to touch on a couple of other areas that we think might be additional knowledge or additional information. So verse 17 says, "By these things ye know that there is a God in heaven, who is infinite and eternal, from everlasting to everlasting, the same unchangeable God, the framer of heaven and earth, and all things which are in them, and that he created man, male and female, after his own image, and in his own likeness created he them." You showed a particular slide. Basically, it talks about the creation, the fall, and the atonement. Right. And I had President Nelson actually had some interesting things to say about that. About the creation, the fall, and the atonement are the three pillars upon which the whole gospel rests. Right. And yet there are those who would attack some of those, specifically the creation. Yeah. And I think it's fairly clear here that he says that he created man, male and female, after his own image and in his own likeness created he them. And I think to some extent, there are those who would try to claim that that's really not the case. But in fact, men and women and humans evolved up through other different things, and that they weren't just put here as man and woman,
Mm-hmm.
and so forth. So that's just another interesting thing. If we really believe the scriptures
Yeah, it's in there.
to be, it's
And
what
later-
it says.
Later on in the year, we'll read that more about that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly.
Future sections of the
Yeah,
document.
exactly.
This
So,
gets back to what we talked about when we talked about section 18, where the Lord told Oliver Cowdery to rely on what's written.
exactly.
Right? Okay.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah, that's
so,
cool.
so if we're going to rely on what's written, then that's really important.
Yep.
Now, obviously, we have the baptismal prayers. We have
Mm-hmm.
the sacrament prayers here. The duties of priests and teachers and elders and so forth are all in there. And we're not going to go through all of that. Is there anything else you wanted to go through in section 20?
Not in section 20.
Okay, let's go on. Move on to section 21,
Okay.
and go ahead with what you'd like to start.
Yeah, I just want to make a couple of comments on section 21 because it's a small section. It's pretty easy to read. But starting in verse 7 here, I'll just read it and then we can discuss it a little bit. Verse 7 says, "For thus saith the Lord God, him have I inspired." Now, who are they talking about? Joseph Smith in this case.
Mm-hmm.
"Him have I inspired to move the cause of Zion in mighty power for good. And his diligence I know, and his prayers I have heard." Now that phrase, the cause of Zion, is another one that I talk about. The origins of where that phrase comes from. What
That
it
comes from
means and so on.
Jonathan Edwards as well?
Well, and other people too, but
Okay.
it's a real interesting history. I think I've written about it in my blog a little bit.
Okay.
So people here probably know I have a blog that kind of goes along with this. It's just come follow me, 2021.org.
Okay.
And there I can put more references and documents and stuff. So I talked about that
You bet.
there.
You bet.
But anyway, this is very interesting to me because the Lord inspired Joseph to move the cause of Zion in mighty power for good. And what is the cause of Zion? It's partly the idea of the church, I guess you could say. But it's also this idea of establishing Zion on earth, really.
Yeah. What is the purpose of Zion?
Yeah, well, what is the purpose of your idea?
Well, basically, they talk about it being one heart and one mind,
Right.
and everybody's basically focused on Christ, and Zion will be an amazing place. That we do that. There's a physical Zion, and then there's also kind of the esoteric Zion,
Yeah.
and that's actually talked about. There's a physical city of Zion as well,
Mm-hmm.
but having Zion in your heart basically
Right.
means that you love your neighbor as yourself, and those kind of commandments.
Yeah, what I see the cause of Zion is the type of society that everybody in the world is looking for.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't matter if you're Buddhist, Hindu, you don't believe in God, you're Catholic, you're LDS, you're Community of Christ, or you're anything you can think of.
And serve your fellow man.
Everybody seeks a society that's just, fair, equitable, where everybody can achieve their potential and pursue happiness and so on. And so, but the problem is everybody's looking for that, but no one knows where to find it. That's kind of paraphrasing, but it's really true. And so it really doesn't matter what your upbringing is, what your culture is. You inherently have this desire for a Zion society. You don't even know what the word is. And you certainly don't know where to find it. But everybody seeks for that. And that's what I see as the cause of Zion. And Joseph Smith was inspired to move the cause of Zion in mighty power. And he really established the groundwork for making that possible. And then in the next verse says, "Yea, his weeping for Zion I have seen." That's Joseph sought it so bad he would weep for it. "And I will cause that he shall mourn for her no longer, for his days of rejoicing are come unto the remission of his sins and the manifestations of my blessings upon his works." One real powerful example of this was when Joseph Smith baptized his father. Because, the Smiths, at least his father and Joseph, had never been baptized. And that was one of the things that was kind of amazing when you think about Joseph and Oliver being baptized. They hadn't been baptized before, And so when they read about it here in the in the translation of the Book of Mormon.
Baptism is essential.
Yeah, I said you got to be baptized, and that's what made him say, dude, we better do something about this. So they asked the Lord about it, and he said, yeah, you need to be baptized, and I'll send John the Baptist.
Go down to the Susquehanna, and off we go.
But then when Joseph baptized his father, the accounts are that he just broke down weeping. He was uncontrolled. And this is kind of what this alludes to as well, because his weeping for Zion, he had such an overpowering desire to have this fruition of the fulfillment, really, of the Scriptures. And this is another reason why I think he was influenced by Jonathan Edwards and James Hervey and these other writers who talked about Zion. And they talked about how the glorious days of the church that were yet to come, and how the gospel would be taken throughout the world. So he had sought that, not just for himself. He wasn't only worried about his own salvation. He wanted it for the whole world. And that's what this talks about right here. Then it goes on in verse 9. And this is where it applies to each of us. Because it says, behold, I will bless all those who labor in my vineyard with a mighty blessing. Remember in the New Testament, Jesus said, if you want to know the truth, you live it, and you'll find the truth, right? All those who labor in my vineyard, if you do the work, you receive a mighty blessing. And what is the blessing? They shall believe on his words, Joseph's words, which are given him through me by the Comforter, which manifesteth that Jesus was crucified by sinful men for the sins of the world, yea, for the remission of sins unto the contrite heart. So this is pretty phenomenal to me, because sometimes people are active in church and they do their callings and so on, but they expect, for example, they'll expect a material blessing that they don't get, or they'll expect a healing they don't get, or something. Yeah,
be blessed with this particular kind of home, or this nice car, or whatever,
or a particular blessing.
Yeah.
And it's the disparity between our expectations and reality that cause people to become discouraged or depressed or lose their faith, right? So it's governing our expectations is really important. It's essential to happiness. It's a basic Buddhist doctrine too, that if your expectations are in line with reality, then you're happy. Mm-hmm. If your expectations are unrealistic or can't be fulfilled, then you're unhappy. And so what is the expectation here? The mighty blessing is that they would believe on his words, that they would accept the gospel and understand, believe the Scriptures and be able to rely on them. And when you do that, then your expectations are more in alignment with reality.
Yeah, how many actually really consider it to be a real blessing or privilege just to be able to believe?
Yeah, well, totally. Yeah, this is a new thing I have.
It's kind of a gift. It can be a gift. Yeah. Some people just have a hard time believing.
Well, what I'm kind of coming around to thinking more and more is the first principle of the gospel is faith. But what is faith? Faith is a choice. Mm-hmm. You choose to believe or not, and that's the first principle. That's what puts you on the whole path. And you don't inherit faith. It's not part of your DNA. You may be influenced by it, but that's because you choose it because of your family or whatever. But it's a choice. It's a volitional choice. And that's what faith is. And so, like it says here, if you labor in the vineyard, then the blessing you get in return is then you believe in the Scriptures and the words of the Lord and so on. So there's no other blessing beyond that other than having this faith. And the faith is the first principle that leads to everything else. Mm-hmm. So then the next one in here is verses 10 and 11. And I like this too, because this is, it says, wherefore it behooveth me that he, Joseph, should be ordained by you, Oliver Cowdery, mine apostle. Mm-hmm. Once again, here it shows that Oliver Cowdery was an apostle. Yep. Same authority as Paul and all the other apostles. But it's fascinating that the Lord, because of Joseph Smith's calling and responsibility, he wanted him to be ordained by Oliver Cowdery. And then it goes on to say, this being an ordinance unto you, that you are an elder under his hand, he being the first elder, that you may also be an elder unto the church of Christ, bearing my name. But what it shows is that there was the gift given to Joseph to translate, the gift given to him to speak the word of the Lord is given by the Comforter, but he still had to be ordained by someone else, because that's the order of the church. And I love that because it shows there's an element of humility involved with Joseph Smith. He never went around saying, hey, I'm so cool, I didn't have to even be ordained by anybody else. He had to submit himself to be ordained by Oliver Cowdery, which is awesome. So, every verse in these scriptures we could talk about to this level, but I think it's important to show this because when we study the scriptures individually, as a family, as Sunday school, as a group, I remember I used to be a Sunday school teacher, and I went in class one day and I said, okay, we're going to spend a whole hour talking about one verse. Everybody's like, what? No.
That's not how it's supposed to be done.
Yeah, you can't get through the whole lesson with one verse,
That's not how we've done it the last 10 years.
And so I did. I said, I told them we could take literally any, well, not literally, close to any verse. There's some verses that'd be hard to, but you could take almost any verse in the scriptures and do a whole hour-long lesson on it because partly because of this intertextuality that we've talked about before, that it brings in other phrases and terminology from other things we can refer to, but also because each one is so profound. And when we can just read them as a novel or something, or as a quote book and not appreciate it, but hopefully by looking at these verses in a little bit of detail, we can get an appreciation for how rich these scriptures are. And how much is really in here.
Yeah, I mean, how many times have we listened to general conferences and so forth where we have one of our brethren basically just really talks about one passage in one scripture,
right,
and then kind of expounds on that and helps us to understand more in depth what that's really meaning, and it's just beautiful. And that's what we're really trying to accomplish. That's the reason why we don't go through the whole lessons in these Come Follow Me supplemental podcasts, because we're hoping that people have matured to somewhat, and we don't have to keep rehashing the same things over and over again. I mean, sometimes that's good, but I think a lot of people have a desire to go a little more in depth, and that's what we're trying to accomplish here. Is if we aren't giving you more depth, basically to some extent, then hopefully we're challenging you to go out and find some more out and study more. Because sometimes you just need to have a little bit of a reason to go out and do that. And for us, when we do this kind of a full-time situation, we're trying to find some of these different answers to these questions. There's nothing that drives the human will more than a good question.
Right. That's right.
So if you come up with a good question and do that, I wanted to go back for just a second.
Okay, yeah,
if
great.
You can,
sure.
Just into to this state. This is again section 21, verse 4. Wherefore, meaning the church, thou meaning the church, shall give heed unto all his words. Who's the his here? It's Joseph Smith, right? And commandments which he shall give unto you as he receiveth them, walking in all holiness before me. For his word, again, I think he's still talking about Joseph Smith here, ye shall receive as if from mine own mouth, in all patience and faith.
Yep.
And I just find that fascinating, brothers and sisters, because of Joseph Smith's position as the head of this dispensation, and because of his the work that he's accomplished and the things that he actually did in his life that merit this. Basically, here's the Lord saying, members of the church, listen up.
Yeah. Well, and I like what the last phrase there, patience and faith.
Yes.
Because patience. What does patience mean when you're listening to the prophets?
Well, sometimes you don't want to, hear it, or they're not saying what you want them to say.
Well, and also in the case of Joseph Smith, he's fallible like everybody else. Oliver Cowdery wrote an entire essay about how the prophets are not. This is letter number 2 in the we've talked about. But he wrote an entire letter explaining how the prophets aren't perfect people, and they never were. Isaiah wasn't perfect.
They're still working out their salvation like everyone else.
So we have to be patient with them and their mistakes, patient with them. The Lord has to be patient with us because we should have established Zion a long time ago, right? And we're still hardly even talking about it today or focusing on it. Instead, we get in off sidetracks and stuff. So we have to be patient with our leaders, our local leaders, as well as our
and also with ourselves.
And with ourselves,
to a large extent as well.
And that's a key part of listening to what they say, but being patient with their faults and mistakes.
Yeah.
So,
And it says, and also in faith.
In faith, yeah.
So even though we may see our leaders may not be perfect, and they may make mistakes occasionally and that kind of thing, as long as we have faith in them and patience that the Lord will see it through, then I think we're going to be just fine.
Well, another part of patience is having faith that the promises the Lord has given us through the prophets will come to pass.
Yeah.
Because, like we talked about earlier today, sometimes we expect immediate answers. We expect answers in the way we want them. Our expectations are different than reality. And patience is a way for us to align ourselves with the Lord's will and the reality that we face in our lives. But it's just cool to know that we have the gospel to guide us, to really inform us how to live our lives in a way that we can realize our full potential and what we really seek.
Yeah. Well, basically, one of the things I wanted to bring out is just that since we know that Joseph Smith holds this important position in the history of the world, really, but also specifically in the history of the church, that listening to his words and not changing them, not trying to twist them or to wrest them, as the scriptures say,
redefine
but
them.
But to do like Oliver Cowdery, or excuse me, what Martin Harris was said to do with to take these scriptures into your own heart, to really utilize the scriptures. And I just love when he says, "For his word shall ye receive as if from mine own mouth."
Yeah.
Now we kind of say that as well with other prophets. When they speak, it's
Right.
the word of the Lord kind of thing. But Joseph Smith kind of put out more of this than anybody else, and it pains me when we see people changing the words that Joseph Smith received in these revelations, which is basically what he's saying here. Yeah. And we're going to get into that in a couple of weeks from now when we talk about the sections 28 and 30 and 32 about the missions to the Lamanites, which was the Lord's term used over and over and over again in all of these different revelations. And yet now we have administrators who basically, and church historians basically, who want to change those words of the Lord and claim that it's just Joseph's words.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, we'll cover that
in the next couple of weeks. So,
time. Anyway, so this is the organization of the church in section 20. Is phenomenal. There's nothing like it anywhere in the world, where the Lord explains why the church should be formed, which a lot had to do with establishing Zion. The different offices and how they relate and how they work together.
Different functions of each office.
And the ordinance of the sacrament prayers and the baptismal terminology. So it's an important section, and as well as 21 and 22. And I think we've covered it well enough for now, unless you have anything else to add.
That's it. So listen, thank you again for joining us on these Come Follow Me podcasts. Be sure to, if you're liking what you're seeing and so forth, give us the thumbs up or subscribe there, and share with your friends and your family members and so forth. I want to thank you, Jonathan,
one other thing
for being
we forgot
here.
to bring up.
Yes.
We love questions.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
People send us questions. We try to address them as we can. A lot of times they're kind of individual, so we answer them individually. But we encourage people to ask questions about this, and if we misstate something or whatever, that's all the more reason. We're all learning together. We all want to improve. We all want to understand the scriptures better, and so we encourage feedback and.
Yes.
Keep sending in questions. We'll put it up on the screen.
We'll just put it up on the screen. Yeah. So if you go to the website, it has contact information there. It's at bookofmormonevidence.org. There's contact information, and the videos have a way you can do that as well. So, okay. So thanks everybody. Have a good week, and we'll see you next week.
See ya.
Ciao.
We're also gearing up for the next Book of Mormon Virtual Expo. Go to bookofmormonevidence.org for more information.
The days ahead are sobering and challenging, and will demand the faith, prayers, and loyalty of every American. May God give us the wisdom to recognize the dangers of complacency, the threat to our freedom. And the strength to meet this danger courageously. As the ancient apostle declared, the night is far spent, the day is at hand. Let us therefore cast off the works of darkness, and let us put on the armor of light. Our challenge is to keep America strong and free. Strong socially. Strong economically. And above all, strong spiritually. If our way of life is to endure. There is no other way.
With over 700 videos that are inspiring, you can fortify your family and friends by putting on the armor of light at bookofmormonevidencestreaming.com.